So hi, I'm Jennifer Goodman. I'm the director of the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance. It's great to have you at this special session named by our DHR colleagues, Who is Left Out? Reevaluating New Hampshire's roadside markers and sharing untold stories. The Preservation Alliance is a statewide nonprofit membership-based group. This gathering is part of our ongoing series to provide information to folks like you. We've done almost one a week since the pandemic started, tracking the results, adapting as we go. We've done a whole bunch of ones on community landmarks and preservation planning issues. I know Wendy and others and our colleagues at DHR have been part of those. I think that's led to some great restarts of great efforts to save and revive community landmarks. I think our old home and barn series has led to some good rescues of barns and some drier basements and some painting before it got cold. And we really enjoy the opportunities like this evening to kind of step back with colleagues and look at critical issues. We've looked at issues facing main streets, especially during the pandemic, with our colleagues at DHR, Division of Historical Resources. We've been lucky to talk about large landscape issues, and here tonight sort of on the whole issue of untold stories or underrepresented history and how it relates to preservation efforts. I think with each, we've tried to leave folks with a couple new ideas, a couple more referrals, and a dose of inspiration, and I hope that's true for you today as well. And I just have to do the plug for the Preservation Alliance. We really appreciate support from folks like you. Almost 80% of our dollars for the activities and impacts we have are from folks like you. So we've been, I think like a lot of nonprofits, we've had both, we're dealing with the old issues as well as a stack of new issues since March, and even a little bit makes a difference. And thank you to all of you who are already supporters of our work. I did say in the confirmation email, but I just wanted you to know we are recording this session so that our partners at DHR and others who haven't had a chance to be on tonight, can join us.
Hello. Hello.
Oh, hey, Carl. I just did.
Jennifer. Whoa. Something crazy is happening here. Yikes.
I'm gonna mute you, Carl. There you go. Sorry about that.
Okay, I had the mic on too high.
Okay, good. So Carl, I was just doing a few introductions and I'm about to turn it over. This is in partnership with the Division of Historical Resources. It's really their show tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy Dixon, who's facilitating for them tonight. And I believe she'll introduce her colleagues and get into the meat of the program.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for having us and being a great partner. I'm joined here tonight by two of my colleagues from the DHR, Brandy Laughlin and Megan Rupnick. And I'm actually going to pass the baton to Brandy, who's going to give you an overview of exactly why we're here. And then I'll introduce the topic.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see so many folks here on a rainy Thursday. This is one session in a series of sessions that the Preservation Alliance has helped us to hold. And this is going to inform our 5-year plan that DHR is working on. The National Park Service requires DHR to facilitate this plan. It's a statewide vision and set of goals for the preservation community. New Hampshire works on a 5-year cycle. So the last plan that was issued was around 2015, and it's time. The plan isn't really a set of goals specifically or exclusively for the DHR. It's really meant to be everybody's plan in the state. It's supposed to be a resource and a roadmap for folks like our heritage commissions and our local historic districts and larger statewide organizations like the Preservation Alliance. It's supposed to be a useful tool for everybody. And it's supposed to look back at the last 5 years and see what we've accomplished, to look at the goals we set for ourselves 5 years ago, see if we've met them, see if maybe they've changed based on field conditions, basically, and to lay a roadmap and goals and objectives for the next 5 years. So it's highlighting these successes and challenges as well as opportunities, and then these goals and objectives for the overall preservation community. And hopefully it will be published in summer of 2021. We have been working diligently on it for quite a while in-house, and we've been information gathering from resources outside. So we're coming up on the real work soon, but this is important information that we need to inform that. I'm going to hand it over to
Me.
Amy now, and she's going to do an overview of today's topic.
Awesome. So today's topic of inclusion or underrepresented communities, and the discussion we're going to have today about who's being left out aren't conversations that are new to the preservation field. However, we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge the numerous recent injustices around our country have reinvigorated these conversations. Some of us on staff here at the DHR have participated in national webinars and conversations about how we as historians can do better. As we craft the next 5-year plan and think about this important conversation we're going to have, like Brandy said, we want to build goals and objectives around the topic that highlight and reflect what's important to New Hampshire. We believe that historic preservation has an important role in bridging inequalities and building understanding in our communities. But we want to listen to you today to hear how we can do better. So now I'm going to turn, Brandy's going to share with you a few slides. We've had an online questionnaire on our website that we've had more than 100 people participate in. We asked some questions about what's important to the preservation community and so on and so forth. I'll let Brandy dive into kind of the preliminary data that we're seeing out of the questionnaire as it relates to this topic.
So we thought it might be helpful for folks to share some of the data we got as a point of conversation. I'm going to share my screen, and please bear with me because I have done this before, but I'm not an expert. Okay, so how do I make this bigger?
Sorry to interrupt. Kathleen's in the waiting room waiting to be let in.
Is everyone here? So as part of the survey, respondents were asked to select their top 3 choices. And all of the questions in the questionnaire were attempts to get at where New Hampshire citizens are with the topics that shape the state and what's important to its citizenry. And the idea was to help us craft the 5-year plan, set these goals and objectives that we talked about. So the responses that we received to date put land use planning as the most important issue pertaining to New Hampshire's sense of place. 33% of people had this as their first choice. Surprisingly, only 1 respondent put diversity as their number 1 choice, although 10 people did have it as their second choice and 4 people as their third. I'm just going to go through this way because the other question we asked was about the 4 most critical needs in your communities. So we had a lot of choices there. And again, the environment ranked highest, which would coincide with the initial first answer of land use being an important factor for folks. There was a modest increase in ethnic and cultural diversity as a critical need in their community over what we saw in the previous question. But we thought it was very interesting when we looked at the data, especially based on current happenings, that this idea of diversity and inclusivity was not kind of a bigger topic. So we wanted to explore that with you guys today. And I'm gonna go ahead and hand that over to Amy and figure out how to make this go full screen. Come on. There we go.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll just go over what the National Park Service and their underrepresented communities program. Since 2014, the National Park Service has been asking of states that receive historic preservation fund grants, like the one our office receives, basically for our administrative costs, they've been asking states to rethink and work towards diversifying the nominations submitted to the National Register of Historic Places. They want to include surveys and inventories of historic properties associated with communities underrepresented in the National Register. In this regard, community may be a place, cultural group, or segment of the population. States are encouraged to identify communities that have had no or limited roles in previous preservation planning efforts, or that have a stake in resources that have not been the focus of preservation work in the past. So now we're going to kind of dive into the conversational part of our presentation tonight with Megan's going to talk about the next slide.
So in New Hampshire, we have three well-established statewide honorary programs, and these include the New Hampshire Highway Marker Program, the National Register of Historic Places, and the New Hampshire State Register of Historic Places. With the exception of the National Register Program, which is most frequently used by developers and completed by professionals in the field, the other programs are generally community driven, and typically local residents will approach the DHR with ideas for markers, and many state register nominations are completed for municipally owned properties to qualify for grants such as LTIP and Moose Plate. These are communities and nonprofits like there are some communities and nonprofits like the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire and the New Women's History Trail that are finding ways to celebrate otherwise typically underrepresented groups. So yeah, the marker program and the state register program are definitely very driven by the residents of New Hampshire. I manage both of those programs, and I work a lot with community members on successfully completing marker applications and state register applications. The next slide. One initiative that we've started at DHR this past summer was the convening of the New Hampshire Marker Advisory Committee. The committee's charge is to review existing markers for lack of historical context or references that could be perceived as inappropriate, and develop a plan to coordinate in coordination with stakeholders to address the identified markers. The markers in New Hampshire some of them date back to the 60s. So they've been around for a long time, and the text, obviously is dated or lacking in a broader context or leaves certain sides of the story out, and it's time for us to reevaluate those. So we've decided to form this group and begin looking at them. So at this point, we want to open up for discussion on are there monuments, markers, or sites that you are aware of that should be or on our radar for either their insensitive content representation? Do you know of any untold story at a well-known site that should be told or recognized in some way? Thoughts on approaches for how inappropriate markers should be addressed? We're considering such things as revising, removing, or reinterpreting the markers as we begin this process.
I'm going to stop my screen share so folks can see everybody as part of the conversation.
So I know we have some members of the New Hampshire Commission on Native American Affairs. So I want to say hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. And also thank you for sharing. You guys have already put in a lot of work reading through historic highway markers and identifying some that to the Indigenous community have some problematic language. I don't know if, not to put anyone on the spot, but if you would like to, maybe if someone would like to share the process and kind of how you approached your review of those, it might be helpful to other stakeholders who might want to undertake a similar process for a group that they feel is underrepresented or, yeah.
I can share. I'm Kathleen Blake. I apologize for being late. I'm with the New Hampshire Commission on Native American Affairs. So our commission reviewed every single state marker, and we compiled a list of the ones that we felt needed to be addressed. It was a rather voluminous list, actually. And we really appreciate being able to provide input. So for other stakeholders, we would recommend that you do the same, that you and your group look through all of the markers and see which ones may need attention. One thing we would recommend is that for any future markers, that you pass the language by the stakeholders. Because a lot of these wouldn't exist or would exist very differently had we the Indigenous been consulted. Anything else, Denise and Paul or Anne, that I didn't say?
Hi, I'm Denise Pulio.
I'm Paul Pulio. I'm not on the commission, but
I am.
I represent the Cossack Band, Pennacook Abenaki people located here in Alton, Hampshire.
And we also, we're gonna speak, not on behalf, but, well.
I'm going to
for is
speak
the
on
right
behalf
word.
of the tribe
But
because
we can speak on behalf of the tribe, but we also are representatives of Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective. So I'm gonna speak on behalf of the group, but not for the group, if that makes any sense. So as a tribe and as Indigenous New Hampshire, we've labeled 23 markers that we find problematic. With that being said, there are also markers that we feel should be erected. I do not have a list of that yet because obviously it's still developing. So yeah, I mean, we got 23 markers. So the question is how do you want to address these markers? Who's going to do the research? How will these get written? Like, I don't know how this process works. So I'm hoping that we could get a little more information on how this panel or commission would like to move forward on this.
let's talk about near history, about the Pennacook one that was put down in Concord. I wasn't informed about it until unveiling that day, and they said, "Can you make it to review what we put on the marker?" It's inappropriate when it's already been cast, and it's very difficult to respond to that and say, "Well, yeah, you did a good job, but you should have really talked to somebody before you decided what the monument was going to look like, the marker." These are not really totally bad. They just need. We're concerned that they get torn down or taken away, because then you forget that history of what you thought it was. I think you almost need to put an updated marker saying after, and I don't know how you're going to frame this, but a lot of these raids and massacres, there's a backstory that we've been able to identify that there were things that were going on that were never really addressed, because when these markers were made, people didn't want to address the ugly truth. Why did this happen in the first place? So that was one construct that we were looking at. So we don't like to destroy history. We really don't want that to happen. We just wanted to decolonize some of the narratives, put up like almost
a fuller perspective.
Hannah Dustin's the key one that we're working on right now. The monument site, I don't know if you people know about the committee that's been formed by the state to look at this. We could get, Denise can really go into detail about it. We really are pushing back from the community that wants to tear it down, because we think if it's torn down, then you're going to miss that part of the history. There's a rich history there, but you got to tell it in its construct of what was going on in 1874. Why did that monument get erected when this whole thing happened in the 1600s. And all these things need to be narrated a little bit, because we get into this thing, if you don't remember why history, who wrote the history, then you forget in the future, and it's a forgotten part of history. We look at the Holocaust, you could just bulldoze Auschwitz, but then you never recognize something happened in Germany. So, these are things that, we look at it in a very positive way, but you got to be careful in how you narrate the future. So we got 23 of them anyway.
Can you talk a little bit about DHR folks about how the process has over time works just from a practical standpoint? And then I think that the Hannah Dustin one is so important to sort of describe what's happening and who's involved, and just feels very productive, like taking a tough situation and trying to find really good next way to talk about it. But
Well, we're still at early stages with the advisory committee, so we're still in our reviewing the markers, and at this point we have kind of prioritizing, and unfortunately all of our funding for the state marker program is on hold right now. So we're going to use this time to kind of strategize and figure out how we can tackle this. So it's a matter of, because we have such limited funding, it's a matter of, being able to have new markers, but also work on these other ones. So we definitely want to prioritize like the most offensive ones that we need to deal with first, and, and we'll work with the commission on those, like which ones we want to tackle first. And so I think it's going to be a matter of just, coming up with a time frame of how we're going to, be able to have new markers and, deal with the ones that we already have, considering how much funding we get every year. And hopefully, the program won't be on hold indefinitely here. I'm not, it's through DOT funds it. As far as the Hannah Dustin, I think that's through the Parks and Rec Department. So hopefully redoing that marker will be part of the whole layout part of that as well. So, I look forward to revising that marker as well. So hopefully they'll coordinate with us and we can get that one recast and more appropriate as well. So
That marker is part of our the greater project scope.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Eventually that will be coming up. So I would kind of take it off your list of ones to worry about, I guess, knowing that, there'll be outside people there to help and pay for it.
I'll be quite frank, really.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
The one that really came to mind was when we were working at UNH, the Oyster River Massacre one. The students really wanted that to be like a counter placard put up saying what really went on with Waldron before that, and why the retribution was
I mean, one of the things, one of the things that, like listening to some of the webinars that we've been, the national discussion about this is that when you have counter interpretations, you have to make sure that everybody reads everything. Because if somebody could just pick and choose and read, they might miss out on what they really need to read. So that was an interesting point that in a national discussion on monuments that I picked up on a webinar as well. So it's an interesting topic. I do want to thank Michael Bruno because of his book. He's made this whole process a lot easier. I don't know if that's what the commission used when you guys were doing your review, but it's definitely handy for us.
I ask a question? I don't know if I'm muted. I guess maybe I am.
Yeah.
I don't know how to unmute here.
You are unmuted, Carl. Oh, now he's muted.
There we
Carl,
go.
there you go.
It was mentioned earlier that there are 23 problematic markers dealing with Native Americans. could I have some sense? I'd like to have some sense of how many markers altogether there are in New Hampshire, historic markers that address Native Americans in one way or another. Are we talking about most of them that are problematic, or?
I believe it's all 23.
Lately, I think they just took all 23. Each one of them has its own little issues, but some of them more egregious than others. You know, some of them more.
Yeah, we could definitely put them in an order of importance.
And this book doesn't have them all either, so.
Yeah. Well,
It's
it has
Bruno's
to get
book.
published someday.
Can Michael talk about his work a little bit? Or Kathleen? Amy, I think you're facilitating this. I'm sorry if I'm.
I just
You're
have
doing
one.
great. I appreciate it.
I just have one really quick question. Would it be helpful if we at least divided the list into these have to be fixed first and these when you can? I mean, I don't know if we could rank them worst to least worst, but you know, that would be a lot, but we could certainly do that if you'd like us to.
I would,
That would be
yeah, I
great.
think that would be really helpful to
Okay.
have a prioritized list.
Okay.
And I mean, Megan mentioned it earlier, and kind of what we've heard in some of these national conversations we've had is kind of addressing like, what is the next step? Is it revising text, but like Paul said, not being completely revisionist? Is it adding information? I guess that's the next thing. Once we kind of have that prioritized list, the next thing we really need to figure out is what would be an effective way to update information.
We'd be happy to work with you on that.
Okay,
commission.
that would be great.
Yeah.
We would love, yeah, I mean, we've certainly identified the commission as an important stakeholder, so I'm
Okay.
glad we can continue to work together.
Thanks. Sorry about that, Michael. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then Ellen, I would love to hear about what's going on with the Women's Heritage Trail too. Michael.
Hi, everyone. First, I want to say thanks to Paul for bringing up the markers. And I recognize you guys. Wasn't it Farmington you were at? So I agree that the Hannah Dustin marker needs to be corrected. But I think what's more offensive to me is actually the statue itself and the words that are etched into the granite. And I also want to share with Paul's position on the construct. If you learn the backstory, things are a little bit more in context, is how they wrote the script, you know, limited to the 12 to 14 lines of text. And in my travels, I found the Baker River sign in Rumney probably the most offensive, because it's basically about Captain Baker coming through and raiding an indigenous encampment of natives in the area, and they raided it and they made a marker commemorating that event. That's the name of the river. So obviously there's some markers that need some context put into it. And I think it's really important that we have the proper stakeholders involved in doing it. And I also agree that we shouldn't be revisionists as well, because whether our history is dirty or clean, it's still our history. So I think Denise and Paul are absolutely spot on.
Do you just want to talk a little bit about your book? And there was a question in the chat about, do a little plug for your book.
Thank you. The book is Cruising New Hampshire History, and it's a book of a guidebook for all the markers up to marker number 265. I actually proposed a marker and had one installed in Bethlehem in 2018, and I didn't even wait to have it published. I wanted to get the book out before the marker was made. But I find that it's a helpful guide because it does have the actual verbatim text from the markers. And then what I consider the most important part of the marker itself is the backstory. And you can't capture the history in 12 to 14 lines. It's a tagline and nothing more. and you will get a sense of the marker. But once you learn the backstory, it really puts everything into perspective. Even the markers that, if you are curious, why is it even a marker in the first place? When you learn the backstory, you understand the relevance and the importance in our state history.
Thank you for that. And it was asked in the chat, is it readily available at local bookstores? Is it better to buy it from you? Is it?
I ask people to go to their independent bookstores. I have Mike Dickerman, who wrote the books on the 4,000 footers up here. He distributes them to me, in any bookstore in New Hampshire will have it. If you're in the Concord area, Gibson has copies, Exeter at Water Street, just any bookstore.
Good. Great.
Or you can email me and I'll get you a copy. But I send them all out signed too.
That's nice. That's nice.
And Megan, thanks for the plug.
Yeah. So Ellen, do you want to just let people know who and how you're representing things, and anything you want to say about the status of your work with sites associated with women?
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate it. So my name is Ellen Koenig, and I'm with the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. And about a year ago, we reached out to an existing organization called the Women's Heritage Trail, which was working as an all-volunteer group to try and get more recognition for women's history around the state. They started their work during the Commission on the Status of Women, and was one of the kind of the last projects that the commission was working on prior to the commission being sunset. And so during the course of their time, this group of volunteers, many of them having crossover from having established the Black Heritage Trail, people like Valerie Cunningham and I'm sorry, the other name?
Jerry Ann
Bogus, yes, has been involved. So folks like that who really had already learned a lot about getting an overlooked group of folks recognized in the state, turn their attention to women. And I guess the short story is there's almost no money to make this happen, no staff and no money to make it happen. So it's been slower than we had hoped. I'd like to just stop and thank Megan, who she's met with us a couple of times and has been a great resource in at least filling in the gaps in our knowledge and kind of guiding us along the way in terms of what we could think about doing. But we definitely want more representation of women's stories in the variety of state markers. I think there are less than a dozen women who are represented of the hundreds of markers that are up there. And as part of the work that the Women's Heritage Commission did, they identified 27 prominent New Hampshire women through their own set of criteria, one of which being that all of these folks were deceased. So they selected women that range all the way from those active in suffrage, like Armenia White, to more modern, and Mary Baker Eddy, those kinds of historical figures, all the way up to more recent folks like Jane Kenyon and Lottie Jacoby, and so folks like that. So there's quite a range of time range of women, but we are interested in seeing these women commemorated. So I'll just tell you in a very short way, we have been working with a national foundation called the Pomeroy Foundation, which had as its goal establishing suffrage signage in every state in the Union to commemorate this year being the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote, or at least some women getting the vote. So we believe we are on track to receive 3 signs from them, specifically recognizing the efforts of Armenia White in Concord as the first founder of the New Hampshire Women's Suffrage Association, a woman named Mary Chase up in Proctor Academy, who I think was the second person running the New Hampshire Women's Suffrage Association, as well as we are hoping to get permission to put a marker at UNH, which had the first suffrage school for new women voters in the country. and we're just awaiting permission from UNH to actually have those established. So the deal here is that Pomeroy pays for the signs, ships them out to you. You just need people to install them and the permission for them to be installed on private land. So this is all a way of saying that we would love to see a few more state markers, but we're also in the process of talking about how to unite all of these markers under an umbrella of women's heritage, because some of these markers are going to look different. The Pomeroy markers are going to look different from the state markers. And it may be that we're able to raise funds for yet a different look of a marker for different women. So it really is just by way of me letting you all know that this work is in progress. We would love on the advisory committee to have someone who represents this perspective of being able to tell more women's stories around the state. I know we can find some talented advisors to serve on that group, but just know that in the coming years, although we're pushing forward without money or staff, we hope to see more of this happen to recognize the efforts of women in New Hampshire.
Sounds good. That's great. So is the advisory committee set for this effort that you all are describing? Megan, Amy, is the Road Workers Advisory Group set? Is there any space on it?
That's something, right now we're trying to keep it kind of small and mostly with other state agency partners. But I think as we continue on, there will be opportunities to bring particularly experts in the field in to help advise. We certainly know we do not know everything. So that's why we're looking to find stakeholders and partners to help us out.
That's great.
That's great.
I would love to get help from you all, just making sure we get this information to heritage commissions and historical societies, those local players on the ground.
Yep.
And then I think I sent this to Ellen. I was wondering if there's that Freedom's Way heritage area that straddles kind of southwestern New Hampshire and into Massachusetts. And I wonder if they'd like to do an initiative like this. And they have federal money that needs to be matched. It would be a very visible and visual thing for them to do. Anyways, I'll follow up with some of you about that. I was thinking they might be a logical partner that has some resources, is oriented to both visitors as well as residents, merging history and all different kinds of community resources together. They might like something like this.
Yeah.
And weave in all these different, underrepresented stories and set a goal for those towns that are in New Hampshire and Vermont and Massachusetts.
Yeah. So the kind of this second half of what we were hoping to accomplish today was hearing from those of you who are vested in your community and its history about, do you have any untold stories that you haven't seen represented that you would like to see highlighted, like specifically? And Paul, you mentioned you have ideas for future markers or future recognition. Did anyone want to share some of those untold stories in the 20 minutes we have left?
Yeah, one of the things we could do is we're working with University of New Hampshire students and faculty, but the pandemic's kind of slowed us down. Yeah. The INHCC, which we call the Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective, has been looking. We have an ArcGIS interactive storyboard map, and we've been looking at all the places throughout New Hampshire to have any historical significance. Some of them are kind of interesting, but overlooked, like Diana's Bath up in Conway. There's nice placards there, but I think it probably warrants a little more attention because it's deep into the park when you see that. And there are quite a few places like that that are covered. One of the things that we found through tourist postcards from the turn of last century. The Flume, before it was a state, a park, it was also called the Abnaki Reservation at the Flume. And we actually find postcards with that notation on it. So we're wondering, is there another deeper and richer history about the Flume that we should be maybe putting up another plaque there? And that's an untold story as well. There's a lot of that stuff. The one we got into that was really kind of thorny was the artwork at the Durham post office, that was done in that time period. We consider that art, sometimes is just like the narratives that you said, it could be interpreted by people. Art is the same thing. When we looked at that Garrison picture with the indigenous person in the foreground with a torch, and it's cruel adversity. When we look at that, we find Jesuit records which said that we claim the English were cruel adversaries because they killed women, children in battle. So everything's in the eye of the beholder. In the text that we put out there, it's interpretive and it can be taken in different ways. So we're very sensitive to this, and we think that we've got to think about this as a bigger group. How do you tell the story and be fair about it, I guess? So yes, there are a few new ones. I mean, the Flume may be one. I'm sure there are others, but Diana's Bath came to mind because I was just up there a little while ago. There's a lot of great places that probably should have some kind of signage, but I don't want to dwell too much on this. One more thing I want to mention. We're hot. This guy named John Harrigan. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, the writer. He did this thing in August about the highway markers, and it's a great little article. And he writes for a lot of the smaller papers, and he and I have been going back and forth on a lot of issues. And he's a bit of a historian and a sports writer and a wildlife writer, but he thinks this is really important that we bear down on these markers and look at how we address this. It's an important part of our history. Enough said.
All right. And just to acknowledge and comment on a comment that Michael made, the reason why Hannah's statue is still there is because it's legally protected. We cannot remove that by law. So we have to work around that. And we figure the best way to do that is by contextualizing, since there's nothing else legally we can do with the site.
Does everybody know enough of the story? I know somebody in the chat asked me if that I felt that people knew the Hannah Duston story, which I know we could talk about for an hour, but we won't. But is there enough knowledge? People understand it's a complicated history.
All right. Let's real quick. There's a woman up in Laconia named Denise Octaculus, I guess. Octaculus. She worked with New Hampshire Historical. She put together a dissertation, about 30 pages of, and we have that as a PDF. Anybody wants to read it. It's just fascinating because the story is so convoluted. Cotton Mather wrote, did his thing. She never wrote anything down. So the whole thing seems to be propaganda. So open your mind. This is a nice read. It takes you a few minutes to go through 30 pages, but it's phenomenal just to read what she wrote.
She did a very fair and even job.
And we could share it with you guys. It's a PDF.
What I'll do is I'll send it to Jennifer, and if anyone wants it, they can let Jennifer know.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
And this isn't, Michael had a question. I also just wanted to, Fred asked about a simple, direct way to connect the markers to a digital source. So that's not directly to your question, Amy, and maybe you want to get back to that, but I just wanted to make sure we brought that up at some point.
Yeah, I think other people have mentioned kind of that QR code scan, because we also hate to consider, the more signage you add, I feel like maybe the less people will read and take away from it, and they'll get some signage overload. And I don't think DOT would allow for too many signs in one place. So yeah, I think the QR code scanner or something like that would link to a website where you could read the backstory is a great thing. One of the webinars I listened to recently, there's a professor, I believe she's in Wisconsin, and she's spearheading a program there. It's called Here, so it's HEARHERE, where there are kind of small plaques near monuments and markers. I think it's in La Crosse, Wisconsin. So there's a phone number you can call and you can listen to a story, but then you can also record your own story and experience about your thoughts or your experience with that site or that statue or what have you. I thought that was a really interesting way. So it's a little more interactive, not just I'm going to go and get more information. It's I'm going to hear some more information and then I'm going to be able to participate by leaving my own story and takeaway from experiencing the site. And then, it kind of someone's there to curate those voicemails basically that get left and then add them to the story. So I thought that was really interesting.
I think Michael and then Wendy. That's cool.
I want to share with the QR code. Last year, I met with the North Country Council's Scenic and Cultural Byways Commission, and we discussed this because of the limited information on the markers as a really excellent resource if we could find funding. But mainly it was coming down to the backstory, because there's such limited text that if you could put something on and you look at the generations are getting more familiar with it, and you're not limited to the amount of information. Some people have talked about apps and, I'm like, that would be great, but I have no idea how to make an app unless it's an appetizer. So I think there's a lot of technology out there that we could take advantage of, and it would probably in the long run save money, and it would be easier to make adjustments if it was a document attached to a QR code. So hopefully we'll get to do something.
Yeah. Wendy from Windham.
Okay, so I have two things. One for the people here representing the Native Americans. Can you hear me okay? Sometimes people can't hear me on this. Okay. And then I have one for the people representing women's history. So I'll start with the Native American representatives. In Windham, we have something called Indian Rock. And I have to be honest with you, I got to go back and read the plaque, but it's like 10 or 12 lines of something written on there. But what the gist of it is the rock has a depression in it that was considered used by the Native Americans to like a grist type of thing, because it's right near Cobbett's Pond, which at some point there was an area that it was where they did fishing and lived there and stuff like that. Obviously not now. But the rock is still there, and we're trying to turn it into a historic district when we get it out of the hands of the state. So it's like 1 acre, and we got to do it the right way, and the state's going to give it to us or whatever. So I don't know if that's on your list is one of the ones that's iffy, and I don't know if you want me to take a picture of it and send it to you to make sure it's not offensive, because if we turn it into a historic district, it would be an opportunity for us to make a new plaque. So when we make a historic district, we do a big green plaque, and we describe it better or why it's important and stuff like that, and it's closer to the road so people can find it.
Hi, we don't have the list in front of us of all the 23 markers. So yeah, please send us a copy or a picture of the marker.
Okay.
There's another one. We every so often we find these small things that historical societies do. Right in Alton Bay, there's a small granite monument that talks about this was a meeting point for 4 tribes. And we can't really find, because it was done in the 50s, you can't get the whole backstory. But we do have a historical name for that location, and it would have been nice if it was more it tied in better than just saying 4 tribes met here and why. It's just these are things we can't know all of the town historical markers. We'd love to know them because we could help you flesh them out, so to speak, because that's what the students are doing at UNH, and we have the time to do the research. They dig deep for us and get some of these stories, and then we vet them and work with other historians and academics to see if it makes sense to go forward with a new narrative about it. One of Nippy, it was a word that was given by Price, who was an archaeologist that talked about trails, and we said, well, what's that mean? It's like aquadatin for the wares. it's historically been screwed up by anglicized words. Each one of them had a very important thing. The wares actually meant a wares, but nobody understood that. And like Nippy, it's where the lake narrowed to a fine point. Those things are really, people would be interesting. And if you had a QR code, so they could just use their smartphone and say, oh, that explains what this is all about, because now it makes sense. It's right here in front of me. The river narrows, or there was a fishing place here or something. So I think the new technology is the way to go myself.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're hoping is when we can make it a historic district, we'll be able to get the plaque. But it also will be a Boy Scout, like we have an active Boy Scout troop. So when they become an Eagle Scout, they take on a project where they build a bigger thing around it. And that would be where we could add additional information and QR codes and all that. I just want to make sure we get the language right. I don't want to make it, I mean, I have to review what we even have there. I've read it and I know, I didn't see anything wrong with it, but it doesn't mean that it isn't something that needs to be fixed. The other question is, I know Jennifer is probably going to give me the contact information so I can reach out to you. We have something, it's like a stone formation that looks like it's like a cone, like a conical thing. And the running thought in town is that it was something used for storage by the Native Americans as they traveled from the summer site on Cobbett's Pond to their winter sites, which would have been, I don't even know where, but somewhere north maybe, or south, I don't know. But we don't know. So we haven't had anybody say definitively, is it Native American? So I don't know if there's anybody there that could help us with that, because even though that lies on private property, it's within the 10-foot range along a road that technically belongs to our town. So we could try and protect that if that is something indigenous. So Jennifer, I hopefully will get the contact info to get the ball rolling on that, because I want to handle those the right way. The other question I had was for the representative of the Women's Historical. We had, I want to get her name right. I want to make sure if this is something along the lines of what you're looking for, but Mary Bradish Titcomb is from Windham, New Hampshire, and she was an American painter, impressionistic. Is that the kind of thing that would apply, or are you only looking for suffrage type stuff?
So thank you for that, Wendy. We are, the 27 women that have already been identified go well beyond suffrage. Probably only 3 or 4 of them are suffrage related. It's just that we have a funding source who's willing to create signs related to suffrage, which is why we decided to focus on that right away. But no, we are absolutely looking for people, women who have made their mark in the state well beyond suffrage activity.
Okay. So would that be somebody you'd be interested in, that I could submit it to somebody, or like, how does that work?
Well, at this point, the group is not taking new nominations, but if you would like to either put her name in the chat or send an email to me or something, I would be happy to at least bring it to the group so that we have a list that when the group is ready to nominate another set, that she is included in that. So maybe
so we wanted to be able to highlight some of the important or not necessarily famous. Do you know what I'm saying? Like people that came from Windham, like we had Governor Dinsmore, Mary Bradish Titcomb. There's some other people as well. And, try and compile something on our own to be able to say these individuals came from our town and stuff.
Sort of cutting
maybe that would.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to take some of these best practices associated with the DOT highway marker current work, and sort of, as Ellen was saying, kind of bring that, coordinate the different commemorative programs and give everybody sort of the best practices information right now. It's sort of going out and coming back in, but I'm thinking, if Wendy is the chair of the Heritage Commission, if they get to this kind of project of wanting to recognize people that maybe are more locally significant, or they're nationally significant, but nobody's ready to give them a marker from a different program. How can we support that work? And so, and kind of get at these topics we've been talking about today, which are really good research, really using stakeholders and that ever-changing group of advisors, and then, you know, hopefully even linking to more backstory through technology or other techniques. Yeah. So the good old-fashioned research, the modern technology, and the consciousness and good communication in the middle there somehow, sort of how I think about it. Those are great local examples, great Windham examples, maybe beyond local examples, Wendy, to kind of test some of those ideas. I'm talking too much. Amy, do you have other things you know you want to cover?
No, I mean, I think unless anyone else had something they wanted to share, we could just wrap up by saying thank you all so much for your oh, I see Denise and Paul. Go ahead.
This is going to take super quick. We have a new
Great.
history professor over at UNH, and what she does is she takes history and she uses these QR codes. So you use your phone and you turn up your camera with the QR code and you flash it onto an area, and it transforms that area visually on your phone into what it would look like back in that time period. So it transfers you visually into what that space would have looked like during that event. So
That's really cool.
oh, it's super. If technology can be sexy, this is it.
I'm going to give
you know, but I
You
mean,
have a link to that?
and it's just something that that's new and developing, and it's something that we may want to consider as and it's interactive, you know, so it brings a whole new level of history to life.
The
You
other
have a way for us to see that, a link or anything?
I will ask Alexis for the link. She did one she transferred from another college, and she did one of these at the other college. I'll ask her for a link and see, you know, if we can do our thing with it.
And I know Ellen had asked for a foot in the door there too. You gave us the link to the group.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kathleen, I saw Kathleen had posted that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just reach out, and you know, Lana, she does a lot of the mail and stuff. She's an anthropology professor over at UNH. She'll hook you up real fast with who you need to speak with.
Now, all of our connections at UNH also have deep roots in the women's studies,
Right.
which could help your women's studies part of this thing, because that would be a great post-grad project to dig deep for women of historical importance, New Hampshire. So this will open up a door for you guys to go through. If you're looking for women's stories, this is also another great thing for students to dig into, find women of importance in New Hampshire history, and maybe you know, these are all post-grads or special interest projects being done at UNH. So this would be another opening for you. You could go right through us, because Lana in our anthropology department are deeply connected with women's studies.
Okay, how would I connect with you guys, or Ewan with Lana?
I'll put Paul's email address down here.
Okay.
And why don't we say that, email me if you don't want your email distributed to everybody else tomorrow, but otherwise
It's public.
We're very public.
Yeah, it's on websites.
But somebody else might not feel that way, but it felt like there was a lot of connections that people wanted to make after this conversation. So I'll plan to do that tomorrow with some of these links, the great links and information about Michael's book. Christina mentioned the great NPR piece on his book. So I'll try to layer in some of the comments and connections we got tonight, which is so good. And we didn't touch all other areas of untold history, right? We mentioned the Black Heritage Trail, but didn't talk about African-American history or LGBTQ history, or you know, other parts of other interest groups or other sectors of history. I think the preservation world has been, you know, very focused on architecture, and certainly there's social history and people stories throughout, but we all know that there's a lot more work to do. So this was a great conversation. I'd echo what Amy said in terms of thanking you so much for participating. The link that I send tomorrow will also have the link to the 5-year plan document. Is that a good idea, folks at DHR?
Oh,
If
yeah.
engage, or you have other colleagues or partners that might want to engage in this topic specifically, or the wider preservation planning issue.
Yep.
I also just wanted to say, I'll make sure you have a link to our future programs and other activities of the Preservation Alliance in the post-event email. And there's also like a 2-minute survey that it's great if you fill that out. We'd really appreciate it. Brandy.
Will that be a link to the plan or to the survey we have out?
I think to both. Does that
Okay,
make sense?
great.
Okay.
Perfect.
I'll make
Yeah,
sure.
if folks haven't taken the survey, please go ahead and check that out.
Wendy, do you have something quick? I know we're kind of at the end of our time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did you say you can still take that survey? Because this is the first I heard about it.
Yep. Yeah, it'll be
You can still
up.
take it.
I think, yeah, we're gonna close it probably in the next 2 weeks. So you
Okay.
don't have to go
If you
take
can
it right
send
now.
that, I'll do it.
Yeah.
If you send it.
That would be fantastic. Thanks.
All right. Thank you and bid you adieu, everybody. Stay healthy and happy, and thanks so much for all that you do.